Dmitry and Christian, who are both co-authors on the Poseidon hash function. They've both been designing hash functions for a very long time. That's what they specialize in. I guess this was an invitation for them to open up the design space to include quantum as well. Christian.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Justin, for the introduction, and yeah, thanks for having us here. Indeed, quite intriguing topics we are discussing. Yeah, so this is meant to give us a bit of a background and overview into what cryptanalysts and cryptographers do when they get together and come up with common designs that try to go into a common direction, in a common goal. The type of functions we are discussing today are quite a different beast compared to many of the other things that have been done in the past. So in that sense, not everything will be directly translatable, but I hope some of the general lessons that we have learned while working in this area in the last 15 years or so are applicable. Yeah, feel free to. So we might, Dmitry and me, we might actually interrupt each other sometimes because we haven't perfectly coordinated our statements and slides. So, but feel free to also interrupt me or us anytime you want. Yeah, let me start out with stepping back a bit with a theory head-on. We could ask ourselves: do one-way functions exist? Do collision intractable functions exist? And the answer is we actually don't know. We don't know how to prove the existence of such things. Similarly, I think we also don't know if equivocal hash functions exist. The thing is, provocatively, do we care? I mean, what we actually care about are, in the end, often only, let me say, only computational properties. So even though we don't know if we can prove that these functions exist, we can still construct them and then convince ourselves and anyone else that it's sufficiently hard to, for example, invert such a function, find colliding input to such a function. And yeah, hash functions have been one of those constructions. They are often called the Swiss Army knife in cryptography because they have many different use cases. And in fact, this list here is actually much bigger. In addition to pre-image and collision resistance, you have many other properties that people care about. Near collision resistance, pseudo-random properties, and so on and so forth. And this list should now be even larger in the sense, namely to include collapsing, non-collapsing, non-equivocal properties, and so on and so forth. So yeah, in my mother tongue, yeah, let's talk about this a bit later. Taking a step back, yeah, 15 years ago, we were in a bit of a situation that the whole ecosystem of hash functions that was out there suddenly, I mean with the course of a year or so, saw huge advances in cryptanalysis. Started out by a number of colleagues, first and foremost, Shen Wang from Tsinghua University, with a number of results that actually had practical attacks on quite a number of hash functions, including MD5, for example, that have been hard-coded into much of the internet infrastructure at the times. When the RFCs were written in the 1990s, these functions were actually hard-coded in there, including the NSA variant, SHA and SHA-1. This all was questioning a lot of the trust that was put in, and that yeah, sped up a lot of the research in this area. And basically then culminated into a process that we refer to now as the SHA-3 competition that lasted for almost 6 years. Lots of people participated, including us here. Yeah, it was being a PhD student at the time was very exciting, so we had a lot of fun. So the requirements that we are actually trying to aim for with such new designs, this is now an expression from my mother tongue. We need everything. The eierlegende Wollmilchsau is here the term. Yeah. So my colleague Christoph back then made an illustration of the beginning of this process of the SHA-3 competition. So what you see here is a map with all the names of the designs that were submitted at the beginning. It was about 50 designs from pretty much all over the globe. But the interesting part here, and that's my point, is about cryptanalysis. And within the first 6 months alone, and these arrows here mean teams basically trying to analyze each other's submissions. And there was a huge amount of activity. This was only the first 6 months, basically. And even though the cryptanalyst community is relatively small, such process was visible enough to really focus attention of not everyone in the community, of course, but still a sizable number of people, and that really moved forward the field fairly fast, I would say. Okay, we have some okay, this slide conversion, it seems, didn't work out so well. Anyhow, what I want to do here with this slide is to mention a few more cryptographic competitions that happened in the past. So after the SHA-3 competition, QSig was the eventual winner, including Blake and Kröstl and some of our candidates being in the final round. Then the lightweight crypto competition started with NIST, started with eCrypt, an European initiative, moving on to NIST. It was a process that actually took 10 years. 2 of my students went through the whole slew of activities, basically, and last year their proposals became such a standard, so that the whole weight of the US Department of Commerce is behind NIST here, so this has quite an impact also globally. More recently, the post-quantum competition, also from NIST, is still ongoing, but is already in an extended phase, started in 2017, going on until now, including hash-based signature schemes, for example, where there people have now relatively high confidence, and we discussed this over lunch today already, relatively high confidence that even though we don't know yet how eventually a large fault-tolerant quantum computer will be built, we have a reasonable understanding of what it can and cannot do, such that we have a reasonable high confidence that the proposals that have been analyzed there will withstand even such a potential future quantum computer. What's more, a more boutique approach to hash functions that are friendly for zero knowledge proofs, that's something that we started in about 10 years ago, became much more active and received much more attention recently. Is also an example where there was not a real formal framework for a competition, but still more and more people were attracted to the field and then trying to improve each other's analysis and design, and that's something that informs the thinking in the community as well. I wanted to say something else with this slide, so this is an early version. An observation here that I'm wanting to mention here is that I/O is an assumption that is made. Indistinguishability obfuscation is an assumption that is made in many of these works, and this puts limits to the practical applicability these days. There is, however, a very ad hoc approach called white box cryptography that tries to achieve something similar, and no one there cared at all so far about quantum safety in that sense, and in case we cannot avoid these I/O style assumptions, it could make sense to address this gap, to try to have practical constructions also. That was one of the points I tried to make. I had 3 or 4 points on my list here. This intermediate conclusion before we move on to Dmitry. Generally, it takes time to get confidence in cryptographic algorithms. The cryptanalyst community is not so big. I guess it's also not so sexy to put a lot of funding into cryptanalysts because it's usually destructive. Well, we break things, and it's only indirectly then benefiting the wider ecosystem, because when you don't succeed, then things become more trustworthy, right? So there's no clean-cut approach to this. With that, thanks a lot for your attention. unless there are any questions, we can move on to Dmitry, of course.
Dmitry, do you want to go ahead? Dmitry. Thanks so much, Christian.
Sure, thanks.
Continue just from the same page. Hello, everyone. Yeah, can I jump further? Yeah, thanks. Thank you, everyone. Thank organizers for inviting me and Christian to this workshop. That's very productive. So we've been learning on the fly, so I've been trying to modify the slides while people are delivering the initial talks. So I've tried to incorporate kind of my latest understanding of what's really going on. Well, once at some point I wanted to delete everything and start from scratch, but hope it will survive. I don't know at which exact time moment the slides were taken from my Google Docs and put into this position. So let's see what I've missed. Okay, let's go on. So I've called it hash functions for a new world because it's about how we design hash functions in a new environment where they kind of didn't exist before, or kind of there was not so big demand. Well, what we call hash functions is actually maybe different what other people in computer world call hash functions, because we need what we call cryptographic hashes. And actually, I would even call them traditional or classical hash functions. These hash functions that well, they're computed on x86 architecture over very long, usually blobs of data, in order to remove any structure from this data, to compress them, to be as uniform in its output as possible, without having any other property. So like all the properties must be destroyed, only kind of uniformity and irregularity properties should be presented. So the functions should be one-way, collision resistant, this sort. There has been a long way of development, as Christian indicated, of hash functions, and over the time in 90s and 2000s, they were scrutinized and optimized a lot. So that at some point of time, hash functions were a bottleneck in real applications. For example, when you kind of download, when you kind of check integrity of big files, even in the cloud or elsewhere, they took really some time, but eventually hash functions that were able to exploit multiple cores, some parallelism, caching, and so on, they appeared, and now they're no longer bottlenecks. So we literally have nothing to do there anymore. So after we designed SHA-3, well, they designed SHA-3, and we helped them not to select SHA-3 from weak candidates. There was also almost nothing to do. But this was about classical hashes. So there also exists so-called non-cryptographic hashing. You're all familiar with it. Things like cuckoo hashing. So the hash functions which are much faster, but they are not that much kind of against adversaries. They to provide uniformity. They're super fast. Sometimes they are keyed, like zip hash, so that if you know the key, you can construct collisions, find perimeters, whatever. If you don't know the key, it should be as secure. If you just query it as an oracle, then it should be as secure as regular hash functions. Well, this is a big requirement, of course, but still they are optimized in pretty much the same metric, like how much data you can process with a second, or how we measure it, like CPU cycles per byte. So that was the primary metric to optimize, and the best hash functions use just very kind of few cycles per byte, maybe even less. And we have billions of CPU cycles per second. That's why we can process gigabytes of data per second, basically. Also, there is a very actually big difference between hash functions that should have no properties, like classical hash functions that I've described, and what we may call fancy hash functions. So fancy hash functions are hash functions that, well, they are collision and pre-image resistant, but in addition to that, they may have some nice properties. They They preserve, they are somewhat homomorphic. They preserve some distance between the inputs. They optimized not for performance. Well, you do select something with good performance, but performance is not primary metric. So you construct them in order to have certain features. And as long as you don't optimize for performance, you also can have better security guarantees there. Because if you kind of assemble a hash function from certain primitives, which security you know, then you can possibly prove that the entire construction is secure, assuming the components are secure. This is not the case at all for classical hashes, because they are so much optimized. Because they kind of so much optimized, there is no room for, unfortunately, for provable blocks here. There can be only provable modes of operation for hash functions, but unfortunately nothing for single components. And their security, it comes mainly from public scrutiny. It's something like, well, everyone, look, I've designed so nice hash functions in trans, like process terabytes per second. Please try to break it. And then, well, either people break it or they say, well, the design is too complicated, we wouldn't even bother. And in this case, you also have to discard the design. So if we look back into how hash functions were constructed for x86 architecture, you may see, like if you look into Wikipedia pages, for example, they're very complicated. So a lot of operations, like over bits, like shuffle bits here, rotate bits here, do modular additions, do XORs, some majority functions, whatever. This was all because these operations are good, are fast on x86. They can be vectorized. And with them, you can process like huge amount of data quickly. But this comes at a cost. Because you work on sequence of bits, and these bits can get multiplied, added, and mixed together. This flexibility, it also opens a lot of attack venues. That like you can think of many possible, you can craft many properties or invariants that can preserve throughout the hash function computation, and that you must destroy in your design. So if there is just one kind of variable, then you destroy properties of this variable. If you have multiple bits, there can be invariant like first and fifth bit are equal, or the sum of these bits equals to 0. Or if you flip this bit, then another bit will be flipped with high probability later on, and so on. Of all these properties you must protect from. It's very nice actually today was for me to observe that this Blake hash function, which was drawn by Jean-Philippe Masson as this structure from like several registers which send information to each other. It's also similar to how they call it ZX structure we have seen today in the category call. You see, like these things are really similar, so maybe one of them can benefit from the other. This Blake design is 15 years old. So 10 years ago, we thought that, well, our job is done, we should switch to something new. Well, PhD students got their PhDs and retired from science, and professor people, they started looking around for new grants, and there was little motivation. But fortunately, new environments like zero knowledge and FHE came into play, and they started requiring hash functions as well. And we started designing something that could work in these new environments, and we quickly figured out that the environment is so different that, we could use some of our experience, but definitely not all. And I will try to illustrate this on the example of this hash function Poseidon. So the first thing that we met is that we don't optimize performance on the regular machine anymore. We have to optimize something different. And our operations are different. We work in circuits over some prime fields or smaller fields like power of 2 fields. We have to optimize the number of field multiplications. We have to minimize it. That's the metric we never seen in SHA-3 competition, for example. We may have to optimize circuit depth. It's another thing no one even bothered circuit depth, why to optimize it. So not relevant to performance. With this new metric to optimize came also new attacks, and well, some new solutions were proposed. So for the ones which optimized field multiplications, we may mention MIMC and Rescue and Poseidon. If we talk about circuit depth, that's designs like LowMC and Trust are good examples of those. There are many others. I cannot mention them all, but it's interesting that whenever you have new metrics, you can find new designs. So the most challenging actually is not to optimize over some metric, but to protect against attacks, and new environments may come with new attacks actually. Let's see how a secure hash function is built. Well, secure is, well, it's not a proof. We cannot prove it's secure. Security here again comes from scrutiny. So we claim it's secure because no one has been able to prove otherwise. That's the thing. So how we make such a claim? So first of all, we look what we're gonna make. We're gonna make a hash function over prime fields. What do we optimize? We optimize the number of multiplications. Which operations are allowed? Whatever field operation over this FP. So how do you do this and still get security? Let's see into these design principles that we follow. I think they can be somewhat instructive, and some of them may carry to new environments as well, like quantum friendliness, for example. So first of all, the first thing that we discovered that if we operate in a field, that many classical attacks disappear. That was great, because they played with bits. Most classical attacks, they looked into bits or clusters of bits or smaller S boxes, and exploited the fact that if an algorithm operating on some registers over x86 stay composed of bits or something close to it. So within the field, we don't have bits. And this field multiplication is an operation which destroys already by itself a lot of classical properties. So that played into our hands, that we could concentrate on optimizing multiplications without thinking of many classical attacks. However, we still would like to process many inputs. So the hash function must compress. So it must compress at least 2 field elements into one, but ideally more than 2. So we have to work with this over a state. If we work over a state with multiple field elements, we have to make diffusion. We must make sure that one element affects the other. So we have to make diffusion. So diffusion, fortunately, can be done by matrix multiplication, which is free because we care only about field multiplications. So matrix multiplication is done by a constant. So we don't multiply matrix of elements by elements. We multiply matrix of constants by elements. This provides us a diffusion. This is fortunately free. Okay, suppose we use multiplications and power functions. So one way which it was possible for us, since we work with in the zero-knowledge environments, we could use not just multiplications, but also root functions, kind of inverse functions to power functions. Not x to 3, for example, but also x to 1 over 3. We could do this, and there were functions that do this, but eventually it played against them. Why? Because, well, first of all, is that it slows down your performance. Well, that's one thing, but maybe not the most important thing. The second thing is that the more algebraic, the more ways you can describe your construction, if it's because, well, if you operate with a root, it means that there is some equivalent construction with power functions. So the more equivalent representation of the same construction exists, the more venues are open for cryptanalysis. So in order to protect from attacks, you must narrow down the attack direction. So you must make the cryptanalyst to follow one particular representation and not being able to exploit anything else. You have to say, okay, this is the way how we designed it, and there must be no way for you to do something else there. You must follow our design principles, and if you follow them, then you will still be convinced it's secure. How cryptanalysts break functions is they found some property, they find a point of view, how you look into a hash function in a way that designers didn't do this. And if you constrain their views, then you make them to look at them in the same with your eyes, and this makes cryptanalysts' job much harder. So, okay, that was the point I would like to make about so-called algebraic attacks. Most powerful of them, those who are familiar with computer algebra, is called Grosvenor basis attacks. This attacks is known to be very dangerous for hash functions in designed over prime field circuits. But for our design, it doesn't apply this well, exactly because we turned not to use many possible representations. We use just power functions. And yeah, that's kind of a brief overview of what we eventually got, that there is a state, like this squares is a state, this big rectangles is matrix multiplications, and smaller squares are just power functions. So it's actually that simple. So you just alternate power functions with matrix multiplication. Power functions, matrix multiplication, and that's it. And over time, these cryptanalysts were not able to find any other representation. That's good. So the more you constrain their view, the better. Since they haven't found anything else, they have to follow our point of view. If they follow our point of view, they can't find any attacks because they have to consider the same principles as we considered. Of course, well, we didn't stop by just publishing the paper. We published some bounties trying to motivate people to break some weaker versions of the function. Because it's also a problem when you make a publication and a hash function by itself cannot be broken. And regular cryptanalyst, if it comes and try to find the weakness, he doesn't find the weakness for the full function. He says, well, I can't break a full function, so maybe I'll find something else, I'll do something else. And then there is no research on your design. This is bad because, well, every cryptanalyst by itself, he knows that he has tried and failed, but the community itself doesn't know it. Community just sees that, well, there is no research in the function, we don't know if it's secure or not. So you must provide some kind of smaller targets, which ideally would increase confidence in the real target. And who weakened the designs and offered within Ethereum, well, and the Ethereum Foundation offered bounties which would break this medium versions, and indeed that was quite successful. So, if we scale down the security level that was claimed, only 24-bit security level functions were broken, but 32-bit one were not broken. And we claim 128-bit one. So we think that's it's a kind of an indication of why the entire function is secure, and this also helped kind of to boost cryptanalyst, third-party cryptanalyst paper. It's now also deployed, and well, the fact that Poseidon is deployed in blockchain applications is also plays into confidence somehow, because there are like kind of hackers and from various countries that are really motivated to steal money from those applications. And I would say that if they knew a way to break Poseidon, they would be able to steal this big amount of money, and we haven't seen any evidence of that. So this also somehow plays into the confidence. But this, of course, all are kind of not ultimate proofs. So it's not SHA-3 which is deployed like on all possible devices across the world, and SHA-2 which exists in certificates on websites all over the world. So this is a much different level of security. But the point is that if for a new environment you create a hash function, that might be the only way to get more confidence, because if it's for a very niche environment, then in order to get it scrutinized by cryptographic community, you have to provide meaningful targets as bounties, as targets on blockchain or something. Okay, so if we go into quantum computer world, then I would quickly recap the situation with hash function. So far, if you use quantum computer on symmetric schemes, then some keyed schemes got badly broken, and some of them just got weaker. But hash functions usually remain almost as secure, so most quantum attacks don't really apply. But there are some classical attacks on hash function that can be sped up with a quantum computer, like attacks on SHA-2 and some AES-based hash constructions. And there are some attacks, like algebraic attacks, which may improve dramatically with quantum computers, but we don't know how much. This research is just non-existent. So we have to take care of that, not only like quantum attacks that we really know about, like Shor algorithm or something, but there are some classical attacks that can be sped up. So if we want to design some hash function for quantum computers, then we have to face the same questions as for environments like ZK. We have to find out the metrics that we optimized, which operations we allowed to make on quantum computers, which are not allowed, who are adversaries, how many times it can query hash function, which does it possess a quantum computer itself, and so on. Do we need some extra properties from this hash function, like equivocal property or non-collapsant property? And then, well, getting it done, it's, well, should probably the kind of concurrent work on many design teams. So you design a new primitive or combination of primitives. You do proof instructions whenever you can. Whenever you cannot, well, you have to live without. Those who are in charge of applying this hash function, that may call for proposals like NIST. And then all the designs go into peer-to-peer scrutiny. This is the way. Okay, thank you so much. I've enjoyed the workshop, and Edinburgh is a beautiful city. These slides are available at this QR code, and I'm ready for questions. Thank you for your attention.
So you mentioned on the slide an adversarial model. Could you elaborate a little bit more on your thoughts about what capabilities a quantum adversary would have in context to the development of a hash function?
Well, that's a good question. Do I know which capabilities? So probably a quantum adversary must have a quantum computer. It must be as powerful as legitimate actor. The question is, for example, if there is some secret key or a trapdoor. What I know, for example, from some symmetric constructions, there is a big difference. If you have, if there is some keyed primitive, the question is if this primitive can be queried, and if it's implemented on a quantum computer, an adversary can query it quantumly with secret key inside, or it's available only as a classical keyed oracle, which adversary can query. There's a very big difference between these two things. So if there is some key involved, we have to figure out if this key device is available to an adversary, and if it's available in which capacity, quantum or classical. So this for example. We also have to think about computing power that adversary has. For example, if we talk about short time signatures or whatever, that like lifetime of several minutes or hours, then we can possibly reduce the security level because an adversary just may not have enough time to run an attack. In particular, if we speak about something like Grover algorithm, which is known to be to take really long time. And then if we know that our scheme should survive only for 10 minutes, then maybe it's just out of question Grover attacks, which cover many bits, and yeah, so on, something like this. That's what comes to mind.
Yeah, I have a question on the fact that we're getting hash functions in new untested domains where they haven't undergone as much scrutiny. And I guess one of the things is, in practical applications, we've gotten very used to hard coding hash functions, assuming they'll never change. And as we saw with MD5, that's a mistake at many levels. But it also seems very hard to work around that. And it seems like something that'll take center stage with more untested hash functions getting used in a variety of domains. Do you know of any good ways to cope with not having that level of assurance? How you might plan for that ahead of time? Yeah,
that's a good question. So if we have to use some hash functions, but we're really unsure of its security, there are several possible ways. So one way is, from the very beginning, insert a rather big security margin into the hash function. So usually these designs are iterative. They consist of many rounds, and by most of calculations, security grows with the number of rounds, meaning that the attack power decreases. So that by adding more rounds than needed, you can somehow compensate for future developments in cryptanalysis, in particular of sudden developments. Then you could also inject a capability for a hash function to increase this number of rounds. So in the case that hash function is not completely broken, but just kind of certain number of rounds is broken, if you have a capability in your code to just change this number of rounds, maybe to double it, then it might become possible to save, at least for the time, it would give you more time to develop some new design. And this is actually the case. So very few hash functions got broken just completely, like you cannot repair it, beyond repair. It was just at the time of SHA-3 competition when there were like too many designs and kind of every attack counted as like stop, the participant must go out of the competition. But in practice, most of attacks can be, well, most scratched, most broken hash functions can be repaired in this way by just proper increasing the number of rounds. Even though it may look not really fair to their competitors, which were not selected, but still, if it's already deployed, then probably you must have a capability to increase the security by increasing the number of rounds. And the final option is to have some backup. So one reason why SHA-3 was designed is and how it was designed, well, how SHA-3 looks like, you may notice it for example, very different from SHA-2. There was a particular reason for that. So one way is to have a backup solution with a hash function which is completely different from the hash function you already employ, so that if an attack appears on the first one, on the former, then probably this attack wouldn't work on the latter. So this backup solution may work out. And of course, the combination of all these principles should give you kind of defense in depth.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
Thank you, thanks for the nice talk. So you gave very nice intuition about design principle, like intuition of why you need these things and would make it secure, even though you don't have a proof. So I was wondering, like this principle that you mentioned, do we have also an intuition or understanding that which of them will still remain secure, which of them will not against the quantum adversary? So if we follow the same principle, are there any of those that we know that we should not follow that principle because it will not be secure against quantum adversary or vice versa?
Well, so far it seems that most attacks we protect from, they don't get a huge boost with quantum computers. So, well, as I said, there are some constructions which suffer from quantum attacks because this construction itself has this periodicity property, which is exploited by Simon's algorithm, and likewise. So it's a kind of a shell of a hash function or a cipher. If there is some vulnerability in this so-called mode of operation, then it can be exploited. But in a nutshell, so when we design a hash function, whether it operates over bits or field or prime fields or fields of characteristic 2, most of attacks, as far as we know, they don't improve significantly. So, well, nothing improves better than square root, for example. And square root is very optimistic for all of these attacks. I wouldn't believe that any, yeah.
Can I ask? So yes, so you mentioned Simon's attack, and yeah, so that's also kind of things that like the rely on superposition attacks type of principle. Wouldn't if one hash function has such vulnerability, wouldn't that be an example of non-collapsible hash function? Because then you can distinguish the classical from, I mean, if you actually have the superposition of something, then, I mean, isn't that the very definition?
Well, that's a good question. So if I remember correctly, maybe, I don't know, Kristen, do you remember? So all these Simon's attacks in hash function, they usually apply to keyed mode, so when there is a key. So when there is no key in a hash function, they don't attack. So all these modes that were attacked, the Simon algorithm, they are with secret key inside.
I think so too, yes. Even more, even generically, there is situations where no quantum algorithm seems to be able to outperform a classical algorithm, even a single bit. So there's the classical collision example. Yes, there are theoretical results that lower the query complexity from n over 2 to n over 3 exponentially, but they need a huge amount of memory, and in practice no one would ever use a quantum algorithm, even if a quantum computer would be available, just because it's way more expensive. Because classically we know of algorithms that don't need memory, and there's no such thing known for quantum. So it seems on that side we seem to be fairly safe.
Can I follow up on this? So my concern was, I mean, I wanted to turn this the other way around, basically the question. So in a sense, I mean, I'm not talking about specific values, parameters, and if the attack is dangerous, like, I mean, would compromise the security or not. What I'm saying is that if there is an attack that uses the concept of superposition, like you have for attacks like Simon, this is actually an example of difference between having access to the superposition and not having, which is the definition of non-collapsible versus collapsible hash function, kind of. So that's, I mean, so I wanted to say that when there are such differences, even if they are not sufficient to break a crypto system, they might be a good hint that this type of structure could be used to construct a non-collapsible hash function. That was my point.
I see. Okay, well, I honestly say that I not 100% understand this collapsing and non-collapsing property yet, so probably we have to look deeper into that.
We're out of time. Thank you so much, Dmitry and Christian.
Sure.
The very last conversation, I think, was the perfect segue for what's going to happen next, because what we're going to do is we're going to break into groups, and we're going to have a discussion on, we're going to get the opportunity to have discussion and understand some of these topics better. So, so what we've planned is 3 breakout sessions, and you can see their definition there in the screen. So session 1 would be about cryptographic design and hash functions, pretty much what we were just discussing. What does it really entail to build these primitives, their properties, and also things along the lines of what Nick was presenting. What are the basic primitives and the relations between them? So that will be breakout session 1. and it's gonna be meeting in a room that we will point you to, and Alex Russell kindly agreed to lead that. So for breakout session, so we're gonna, the plan would be to head out there in 10 minutes or so. So you can go grab a coffee from the back of the room and then come back here, and the meeting point for breakout session room would be that side. All right, so you're meeting on that side for breakout session room 1. Now, number 2 is about implementation, quantum circuits, optimization. Is there near or medium-term feasibility, quantum memory, any alternatives paradigms for quantum? And that will be breakout session number 2. And this would be, Petros kindly agreed to chair that breakout session. And the meeting would be here. Okay, all right, just in the front of the room. And finally, breakout session number 3, applications. How does one use one-shot cryptography to do amazing things? This is very much along the lines of Justin's presentation from this morning. And those of you that would like to join that, please come to that side of the room. Okay, so breakout session 3, applications, algorithms and design and hash functions to the back, and here in the front, implementation and optimization techniques. All right. Just only minor points. The first 2 breakout sessions, they are in this building complex, in different room, but in this building complex, so you don't have to walk outside. The third one, you'll have to walk outside for 30 seconds. So just keep that in mind. That's a warning. All right. Any questions or anything you want to, anything anybody wants to clarify? It's not in the back. Oh, it's actually there, waiting for you. So that's actually, that was actually very smart. Yeah, much appreciated, Gareth. Yeah. So if you want to have coffee and cake, you have to join your breakout session. All right, so thank you very much. And we are back here, I should say, at 4 p.m., where we're going to have a post-breakout session summary discussion. And then we're going to be for the last session.